The winds howled through the obsidian spires of the northern reach, carrying whispers of a legacy no Levi so dared speak aloud. In the heart of King Alfa's domain, where shadows conspired in secrets festered like wounds that refused their heal, stood a structure that had remained untouched for 3 generations. The frozen tower. Its walls, encased in ice that never melted, even under the scorching summer sun, had been sealed by royal decree on the night Morgana's grandmother vanished from court. No one entered, no one questioned, until the night the king's seal shattered, and Morgana received a summons written in her own blood. The great cow had fallen silent when the messenger arrived, his face pale as winter frost, clutching a scroll that radiated an unnatural cold. King Alfa sat upon his throne, his expression carved from stone, but those who knew him well could see the tremor in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white. Morgana stood before him, draped in midnight silk that seemed to absorb the light around her, her silver eyes fixed upon the document that bore both the royal crest and something far more ancient, a mark that predated the kingdom itself, the mark of the frozen covenant. The king spoke, his voice echoing through the vaulted chamber like distant thunder. The tower, he declared, now belonged to Morgana by right of inheritance, as decreed by laws older than his crown, laws even he could not override. The court erupted in whispers. Lord Verick, the chief counselor whose influence had grown like poison ivy through the castle walls, stepped forward with practiced concern etched upon his features. He reminded the assembly that the tower had been sealed for good reason, that the previous inheritor, Morgana's grandmother Elara, had entered its depths in image change, speaking in tongues of ice in prophecy before disappearing entirely on the winter solstice 30 years prior. But the law was absolute. The inheritance could not be refused, could not be delayed, could not be transferred. Morgana would enter the frozen tower at dawn, and what she found there would be hers to bear, for better or for worse. King Alfa dismissed the court with a wave of his hand, but his eyes never left Morgana's face, searching for something, perhaps fear, perhaps understanding, perhaps confirmation of suspicions he had harbored in the darkest corners of his mind. That night, Morgana did not sleep. She wandered the castle's forgotten corridors, past tapestries depicting battles long concluded and hearses long turned to dust, until she found herself in the royal archives. The librarian, an ancient woman named Thessaly who had served 3 generations of the royal family, looked up from her work without surprise, as if she had been expecting this visit for decades. Without a word, Thessaly produced a leather-bound journal, its pages in low juetage, its cover marked with the same symbol that had appeared on the inheritance scroll. Morgana's grandmother's diary, hidden away all these years, waiting for this very moment. The entries began innocuously enough. Elara had been a scholar, fascinated by the old magic that predated the kingdom's founding, the magic that the church had spent centuries trying to erase from history. She wrote of discovering references to the frozen tower texts that should not have existed, books that had supposedly been burned during the Purification Wars. The tower, she claimed, was not built by King Alfa's ancestors. It was far older, a remnant of the First Kingdom, the realm that had fallen when its rulers had attempted to breach the barrier between the mortal world and the realm beyond the veil. As Morgana read deeper into the night, the entries grew more frantic, more fragmented. Elara had uncovered something, a truth that had sent her spiraling into obsession. The frozen tower was not a monument or a fortress. It was a prison. And what it held was not treasure or ancient weapons or lost knowledge. It held the true origin of King Alfa's bloodline, a secret so devastating that it had been buried beneath layers of ice in nice royal decree. Elara's final entry, dated the day before her disappearance, contained only 7 words written in shaking script: "The king is not what he seems." Dawn arrived with cruel swiftness, painting the sky in shades of bloody ash. Morgana stood before the frozen tower as the court assembled behind her at a respectful distance, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and barely concealed terror. King Alfa himself had come, dressed not in his ceremonial robes but in the simple black armor he wore in times of war. He approached Morgana, and for a moment, they stood face to face, two figures bound by fate in blood and secrets that neither had chosen to inherit. The king pressed a key into her palm, a key made of black ice that burned with cold fire. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper, meant for her ears alone. He told her that whatever she found in the tower, whatever truths revealed themselves in those frozen house, she must remember that some secrets were sealed away not out of shame, but out of necessity. Some truths, he said, were capable of destroying not just kingdoms, but the very fabric of reality itself. Then he stepped back, his face an unreadable mask, and gestured for her to proceed. The key fit perfectly into a lock that should not have existed, for the door appeared to be solid icy, seamless and impenetrable. But as the key turned, the ice began to crack, spreading outward in crystalline patterns that resembled veins or perhaps the branches of a tree struck by lightning. The door swung up beyond silent hinges, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness so complete it seemed to devour the morning night. Morgana descended. Each step echoed the silence, a heartbeat counting though to an unknown revelation. The walls were lined with ice, but frozen within that ice were images, scenes from history that should not have been possible. She saw King Alfa as a young man, but the image was wrong, distorted, as if the ice itself were trying to show two different versions of the same person occupying the same moment. She saw battles that had never been recorded in the official histories, saw the king standing alone on a field of corpses, his hands raised to the sky as something vast and terrible descended from the clouds. The staircase ended in a vast circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with alcoves containing frozen figures. At first, Morgana thought they were statues, perfect ice sculptures of nobles and scholars and warriors. But as she moved closer, she realized with growing horror that they were not sculptures at all. They were people, perfectly preserved in ice, their eyes open aware, their expressions frozen in various states of terror and understanding. And she recognized some of them: courtiers who had supposedly died in their sleep, scholars who had vanished during research expeditions, advisors who had fallen from the king's favor and been exiled to distant lands. But each was the figure at the center of the chamber that stopped her heart. A man suspended in a pillar of ice, his body radiating a pale blue light that filled the entire space with an otherworldly glow. He was beautiful in the way that winter is beautiful, terrible and perfect and absolutely inhuman. His eyes were closed, but Morgana could feel his awareness, could sense the vast intelligence trapped within that frozen prison. And she knew, with a certainty that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the core of her being, that she was looking at the real King Alfa, the man who sat on the throne, who ruled the kingdom, who she had called king her entire life, was someone else, something else, a substitute, a replacement, a lie made flesh. The chamber's walls began to glow, a text appeared in the ice, written in the old language that only scholars and witches still knew how to read. The story unfolded before her eyes, a tale of desperation and ambition and a bargain struck in the darkest hour of the kingdom's history. 50 years ago, the realm had stood on the brink of collapse. Plagues ravaged the countryside. Neighboring kingdoms pressed at the borders. The treasury was empty. The people were starving. And the young King Alfa, newly crowned after his father's assassination, had no idea how to save his people. That was when the entity came to him. It called itself the Winter King, a being from beyond the veil, a creature of pure magic and ancient hunger. It offered a solution, a merger. It would lend Alpha its power, its knowledge, its ability to manipulate reality itself. In exchange, it would live through him, experience the mortal world through his senses, rule through his body. A partnership, Each claimed a symbiosis. The kingdom would be saved, both of them would benefit. But Alfa, desperate and terrified, fartou young to bear the weight of a dying kingdom, made a mistake. He asked what would happen if he said yes. In the winter king smiled and said that Alfa would never have to worry about the burden of rulership again. He would be preserved, kept safe and perfectly untouched by time, while the winter king wore his face and saved his kingdom. Alfa agreed. He had no choice. The alternative was watching millions die. So the switch was made. The Rei Alfa was frozen in the tower, his consciousness trapped but aware, able to see everything his body did but unable to control it, unable to speak, unable to stop the entity that had stolen his life. In the winter king took the throne, speaking with Alfa as voice, ruling with Alfa as authority, making decisions that saved the kingdom but also changed it in subtle, insidious ways. The text on the walls continued, explaining that the winter king had fulfilled its part of the bargain. The kingdom prospered, the plagues ended, the enemies were defeated, but the entity had its own agenda, its own long-term plans. It had been searching for something, using the kingdom as resources and Alfa as authority to hunt through ancient texts in forbidden places, looking for a way to make the transfer permanent, to sever its connection to the realm beyond the veil and become truly mortal, truly alive, truly unstoppable. It had almost succeeded. The ritual was nearly complete. In 3 days, on the winter solstice, the same night Elara had disappeared, the winter king would perform the final ceremony. It would consume Alfa's essence entirely, not just his body but his soul, and in doing so, it would become real, would shed the limitations of its otherworldly nature and become something new, something that had never existed before, a god immortal form. But there was a complication. The ritual required a specific bloodline to witness and consent. A descendant of the first kingdom, someone with the old magic flowing through their veins, someone like Elara, someone like Morgana. That was why Elara had disappeared. She had discovered the truth, had committed this chamber just as Morgana had, and the Winter King had realized she could be useful. He had given her a choice: consent to the ritual and watch the kingdom continue to prosper under his absolute rule, or refuse and be sealed away like all the others who had discovered the secret. Elara had chosen a third option. She had tried to break the spell, to free the Rei Alfa, and in the attempt, she had shattered her own mind, the magical backlash reducing her to a babbling oracle who spoke only riddles and warnings that no one could understand. The Winter King had kept her alive, trapped in a pocket dimension between heartbeats, not key to present in the mortal world but not key to gone either, just in case he ever needed her bloodline again. And now, with Morgana inheriting the tower, the opportunity had presented itself once more. Morgana stood in the center of the chamber, her mind racing, her heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Everything she knew was an lie. The king she had served, the ruler she had respected despite his cold demeanor and calculating nature, was not a man at all. He was a parasitic entity wearing a stolen face, preparing to ascend to godhood using her blood as the final component. But why had he allowed her to enter the tower? Why had he given her the key, knowing what she would find? The answer came to her with chilling clarity. Because he wanted her to know. Because the ritual required understanding, required conscious choice. She had to enter the ceremony knowing exactly what was at stake, knowing exactly what she was consenting to, or the magic would not work. He had gambled that faced with the choice between allowing the ritual and plunging the kingdom into chaos by revealing the truth, she would choose the stability of the lie. A sound echoed through the chamber, the grinding of stone on stone. The staircase was sealing itself behind her. She was trapped. From above, she heard footsteps, measured and deliberate, the sound of someone descending without fear or hesitation. King Alfa, or rather the Winter King wearing his face, emerged from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. He looked exactly as he always did, regal and composed, but now Morgana could see the truth beneath the surface. His eyes held depths that no mortal gaze should possess. His smile was too perfect, too symmetrical, like a mask carved by someone who had studied human expressions but never truly felt them. He applauded slowly, the sound echoing off the frozen walls. He told her that she had done exactly what he knew she would do: commandeer the tower, read the history, understand the truth. He explained that her grandmother had been useful, but ultimately flawed. Elada had let emotion cloud her judgment, had tried to fight instead of accepting the inevitable. But Morgana was different. Morgana was pragmatic. Morgana understood power in the cost of maintaining it. He offered her a place at his side, not as a consort or an advisor, but as something more. Once the ritual was complete, once he became truly divine, he would need anchors to the mortal world, people who understood his true nature and could serve as his eyes and ears among the purely human population. She could be one of them. She could be his high priestess, his prophet, his partner in reshaping the world according to a vision that transcended petty human concerns. Morgana asked him why he needed the ritual at all. If he had ruled successfully for 50 years, if the kingdom prospered under his guidance, why risk everything to become something more? The Winter King's expression shifted, and for a moment, genuine emotion flickered across his stolen features. Fear, because his kind, he explained, were not meant to exist in the mortal world for extended periods. Every day, every hour, he felt himself being pulled back toward the veil, toward the frozen realm he had left behind. The bargain with Alpha had given him temporary stability, but it was just that, temporary. In another year, maybe two, the pull would become irresistible, and he would be dragged back, leaving the kingdom leaderless in Alpha's body and empty shell. The ritual was not about ambition. It was about survival, about refusing to return to an existence of eternalized in endless hunger. He extended his hand toward her, and Morgana saw that his fingertips were beginning to crystallize, tiny icy formations spreading across his skin like a disease. The deterioration was accelerating. Chimmy was running out faster than he had anticipated. The winter solstice ritual was not just optimal, it was necessary. Without it, he would be gone within weeks, and everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed Alpha's life to create, would collapse into chaos. Morgana looked at the frozen figure of the Real King Alfa, trapped and aware, a prisoner in his own life for 5 decades. She thought about her grandmother, her mind shattered, existing in a liminal space of madness and prophecy. She thought about all the frozen figures lining the walls, people who had discovered the truth and paid the ultimate price. She thought about the kingdom. Millions of people living their lives, unaware that their prosperity was built on a foundation of nice and stolen identity. The Winter King told her she had until midnight to decide. 3 days from now, on the solstice, he would perform the ritual whether she consented or not. But her willing participation would make it cleaner, more stable, would ensure that the transformation was complete and irreversible. Without her consent, there was a chance the magic could fracture, could create instabilities that might eventually unravel everything. He preferred certainty, but he would accept risk if necessary. Then he turned and walked back up the stairs, the icy ceiling behind him once more, leaving Morgana alone in the frozen chamber with the preserved victims of his long deception. She approached the pillar containing the Real Alfa and placed her hand against the ice. It was cold enough to burn, but she held her palm there anyway, trying to reach through the barrier, trying to sense if any part of the mirror inside was still capable of communication. At first, there was nothing, just cold, just silence. But then, slowly, like a candle flame guttering to life in complete darkness, she felt something, a presence, a consciousness that had been waiting, hoping, enduring for 50 years. The connection formed, not through words but through pure sensation and emotion. Alfa's awareness flooded into her mind, a torrent of memories and regrets in desperate hope. She saw his last moments of freedom, the night he made the bargain, the terror and relief mixed together as the Winter King took control. She felt his horror as he watched his body move without his permission, speak with his voice, make decisions he would never have made. She experienced his anguish as year after year passed, as the kingdom thrived under his stolen rulership, as people praised the name of Alfa while the Rei Alfa screamed silently in his frozen prison. But beneath the pain and rage, there was something else. A plan, incomplete, fractured by decades of isolation, but still present. Alfa had not been passive in his imprisonment. He had observed, learned, understood the nature of his captor in ways the Winter King did not realize. The entity was powerful, yes, but it was also limited by the very bargain that gave it access to the mortal world. It could only maintain its hold on Alfa's body through the original connection, a magical tether that existed in a specific location, sustained by a specific artifact. The crown. Not the ceremonial crown that sat in the throne room, but the true crown of the kingdom, the relic forged during the First Kingdom Golden Age, a circlet of black ice, in frozen starlight that had been hidden away in the royal vault centuries ago because of the dangerous magic it contained. The Winter King had retrieved it, had used it as the focus for the original ritual, and it remained the anchor point for his possession. If the crown was destroyed, the connection would sever. The Winter King would be pulled back beyond the veil, and Alfa would be free to reclaim his body. But there was a problem. The crown was hidden somewhere in the tower itself, protected by layers of magical wards that only someone of the royal bloodline could bypass. Alfa, trapped as he was, could not access it. He had hoped that if someone ever discovered the truth, if someone like Elara Morgana found their way into the chamber, they might be able to reach the crown and destroy it. But Elara had been stopped before she could complete the task, and now the same fate awaited Morgana, unless she could find a way to outsmart a creature that had been manipulating reality for half a century. The connection faded, leaving Morgana gasping and disoriented, her hand still pressed against the ice. She had her answer now. She knew what she had to do, not consent to the ritual. Not expose the truth. He watched the kingdom descend into civil war when people learned their beloved king was a fraud. But find the crown, destroy it, and free Alfa before the winter solstice made the possession permanent. She explored the chamber methodically, examining every alcove, every frozen figure, every crack in the ice-covered walls. The wards were subtle but present, shimmering barriers that deflected attention, that made certain areas of the chamber seem less interesting, less worthy of investigation. But Morgana had been trained in the old magic by tutors who remembered the days before the church's dominance. She knew how to see through glamour's misdirection. Behind the largest of the frozen figures, a knight in ancient armor with his sword raised as if to strike, she found a door. Not carved or built, but formed from the ice itself, barely distinguishable from the surrounding wall except for the faint outline where the magical energies concentrated. She pressed her palm against it, felt the words test her bloodline, her intentions, her worthiness. For a moment, nothing happened, and she wondered if she had been mistaken. Then the ice began to melt, water running down in rivulets that froze again before hitting the floor, and the door swung open. The chamber beyond was small, barely large enough for two people to stand comfortably. In its center, suspended in the air by invisible forces, rotating slowly as if displayed in the window of some cosmic jeweler, was the crown. It was beautiful in terrible in equal measure, a circlet of black ice that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, set with gems that looked like frozen stars, each one containing a spark of otherworldly fire. Just looking at it made Morgana as water, made her head ache with the pressure of incomprehensible magic compressed into physical form. She reached for it, and the crown reacted. Not with violence, but with communication. It spoke directly into her mind, its voice neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but something beyond such classifications. It told her that each had been waiting, that each knew why she had come, that each approved of her intentions. The crown was not evil, not malicious. It was a tool, a conduit for power. In like all tools, it could be used for creation or destruction. The Winter King had used it to steal a life, but it could also be used to restore that life, if Morgana had the strength to wield it properly. The crown offered her a choice. She could simply destroy it, shatter the artifact, and sever the Winter King's connection to the mortal world. Alpha would be freed, but the Winter King would not go quietly. Its final moments before being pulled back beyond the veil, it would lash out, would unleash every scrap of power it possessed, a catastrophic explosion of magic that could level the castle, kill hundreds, maybe thousands. The entity would be gone, but the cost would be horrific. Oh, she could do something mighty complex, mighty dangerous, but potentially mighty elegant. She could wear the crown herself, use its power to enter the magical connection between the Winter King and Alpha's body, and sever the tether from the inside. It would require her to essentially wage a battle in a space between heartbeats, in the liminal realm where consciousness and magic intersected. She could fail, she could die, she could end up trapped just like her grandmother, her mind shattered by forces no mortal was meant to comprehend. But if she succeeded, the separation would be clean. The Winter King would return to its realm with minimal collateral damage, and Alpha would reclaim his body without catastrophe. Morgana lifted the crown from its invisible pedestal, and immediately the world shifted. She was no longer standing in the hidden chamber but floating in a vast emptiness, a void that stretched in all directions without end. The crown sat upon her head, cold and heavy and burning with power. Before her, she saw them both, King Alpha, or rather his body, his physical form, standing rigidly expressionless, in the Winter King, visible now as separate from its host, a towering figure of ice, starlight and ancient hunger, its true form revealing just how alien it truly was. The entity noticed her presence and turned, its expression shifting from surprise to anger to cold calculation in the span of a heartbeat. It demanded to know how she had found the crown, how she had bypassed the wards, how she dared to enter this sacred space where mortal minds were not meant to tread. Morgana did not answer with words. Instead, she reached into the crown's power, felt it to respond to her will, and pulled. The tether between the Winter King and Alpha's body became visible, a rope of frozen light binding the entity to its stolen vessel. Morgana grasped the rope with hands that were no longer entirely physical, that existed in this strange space between magic and reality, and she began to unravel it, strand by strand. The Winter King roared, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a cry of rage and desperation that made the void itself shudder. It attacked, throwing waves of ice and darkness at her, trying to freeze her consciousness, to shatter her mind before she could complete the severing. But the crown protected her, its ancient magic forming a shield that deflected the worst of the assault. They fought in the timeless space, exchanging blows that were not physical but conceptual, attacks that targeted not flesh but the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Winter King was stronger, had mighty raw power, had centuries of experience manipulating magic in ways Morgana could barely comprehend. But Morgana had something it did not. She had purpose. She had righteousness. She had the knowledge that what she was doing was restoring balance, was correcting a fundamental injustice. And she had help. From within Alpha's frozen body, the Real King's consciousness turned, awakened by the battle raging around it. He joined his will to Morgana's, adding his strength to her efforts, pulling from the other side of the tether, trying to reclaim what had been stolen from him. The Winter King fought desperately, knowing that if it lost it would lose everything, would be cast back into the frozen realm from which it had escaped, would return to an existence of eternal isolation and hunger. But desperation made it sloppy. In its panic, it overextended, poured too much of its essence into a single massive attack meant to obliterate both Morgana and Alpha in one devastating strike. Morgana saw the opening and took it. She pulled with all her strength, channeling every ounce of power the crown could provide. The tether snapped. The Winter King screamed, its form beginning to dissolve, to be pulled backward toward the veil. It reached out, trying to grab hold of something, anything, to anchor itself in the mortal world. But there was nothing left to hold. The connection was broken. The bargain was voided. Its time in the mortal realm was over. As it faded, the entity spoke one last time, its voice full of bitterness and regret. It said that it had truly tried to be a good king, that it had genuinely cared for the kingdom in its own way, that everything it had done was to protect and preserve. But Morgana did not reply. She had no words for a creature that had stolen 50 years of a mercy life, no matter how noble its stated intentions. Then the Winter King was gone, pulled back beyond the veil, back to the frozen realm where it belonged. The void around Morgana began to collapse, reality reasserting itself. She removed the crown, felt the power drain away, felt herself falling back into her physical body in the hidden chamber. She gasped, her lungs burning as if she had been holding her breath underwater. The crown was in her hands, no longer glowing, no longer radiating power. It was just icy now, ordinary ice that was already beginning to melt. She let it fall to the floor, where it shattered into 1,000 fragments that evaporated into mist. Morgana ran back to the main chamber, her heart pounding with hope and terror. The pillar containing Alpha was changing, the ice cracking, melting, steam rising as the preservation spell finally broke. And within the pillar, movement. A hand flexing, eyes opening, a chest rising and falling with breath. King Alpha emerged from his frozen prison, stumbling, falling to his knees, his body having to remember how to function after 5 decades of forced stillness. Morgana rushed to his side, caught him before he could collapse entirely. He looked up at her with eyes that held the weight of unimaginable suffering, and also profound gratitude. He tried to speak, but his voice was a harsh rasp, his throat unused to forming words. Morgana helped him to his feet, supported his weight as he learned to walk again. Around them, the other frozen figures began to thaw as well, the Winter King's magic unraveling now that its caster was gone. The chamber filled with gasps and cries as people who had been trapped for years, some for decades, suddenly found themselves free. But there was no time for reunion or celebration. Morgana knew that above them, in the castle, chaos was erupting. The Winter King's departure would have been felt by anyone with even a trace of magical sensitivity. The court would be in pandemonium, questions would be asked, accusations would be made. And without an explanation, without a plan, the kingdom could tear itself apartamento. Alpha straightened, his body remembering its strength, his mind reasserting control after so long a passive observation. He looked at Morgana and spoke, his voice growing stronger with each word. He told her that they had to move quickly, had to get to the throne room before panic spread too far. He would reclaim his throne, would announce his return, would provide an explanation that would satisfy the court without revealing the full horrific truth. A story about being held captive by dark magic, about being rescued by Morgana's courage and sacrifice. It was not entirely false, just carefully edited. They ascended the spiral staircase together, the other freed prisoners following behind them like a spectral procession. The tower's doors, sealed by the Winter King's magic, swung up easily now, revealing a courtyard filled with confused and frightened nobles. Lord Verick stood at the front, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had been the Winter King's closest advisor, had worked with the entity for decades without ever suspecting the truth. Now he stared at Alpha with a mixture of relief and confusion, unable to reconcile the more before him with the king he thought he knew. Alpha raised his hand for silence, and the crowd obeyed instantly, responding to an authority that resonated on a fundamental level. He spoke, his voice carrying across the courtyard, intoned the story of treachery and imprisonment, of dark magic and faithful servants, of his daughter Morgana, who had risked everything to free him. He did not mention the Winter King by name. He did not explain the full extent of the deception. He gave them enough truth to satisfy their need for explanation, but not so much that each would shatter their faith in the crown itself. The crowd erupted cheers, celebration, relief that their king had returned. But Morgana saw the faces in the crowd, saw the doubt, saw the questions forming in eyes that were not convinced. She knew that this peace was fragile, that in the days and weeks to come, people would start to wonder, would start to piece together inconsistencies, would start to question how 50 years could have passed without anyone noticing something was wrong. Alpha seemed to sense her concern. He took her hand, squeezed each gently, he told her that they would face those questions together. He had spent 5 decades watching the Winter King rule his kingdom, had seen every decision, every policy, every subtle manipulation. He knew what needed to be undone, what needed to be preserved, how to transition back to human rulership without causing catastrophic disruption. It would take time. It would require careful planning, but they would do it together. That night, as the castle settled into an uneasy calm, Morgana stood alone in the royal archives, Thessaly having retired hours earlier. She held her grandmother's journal, reading the final entry once more. The warning that the king was not what he seemed had proven prophetic, but incomplete. Elara had seen the truth, but she had not understood the full scope of the problem, had not realized that the solution was not simply exposure, but careful restoration. Morgana added her own entry to the journal, documenting everything that had happened, everything she had learned, everything she had done. She wrote each not as a boast or a confession, but as a warning for future generations, because she knew, with cold certainty, that the crown was gone but other artifacts of the First Kingdom remained, other relics that could tempt desperate rulers into making bargains they did not fully understand. Other entities beyond the veil that ungered for the mortal world, and would seize any opportunity to cross over. The truth she had uncovered, the secret that had shattered the realm's messy understanding of itself, was not just about one king and one entity. It was about the fundamental vulnerability of power, the way authority could be stolen and worn like a mask, the ease with which people could be deceived if the deception was comprehensive enough. The Winter King had ruled well, had been beloved, had achieved genuine prosperity for the kingdom, and yet its rule had been built on theft and imprisonment and ice. Morgana closed the journal and returned it to Thessaly's care, with instructions that it be hidden but not destroyed, preserved for the day when someone else might need to know the truth. Then she walked to the frozen tower one last time, watching as workers began the process of dismantling each, stone by stone, ice by ice, erasing the physical evidence of the kingdom's darkest secret. But the tower would never truly be gone. It would live on memory, whispers, stories told, hushed voices about the night the seal shattered and the truth was revealed. Future historians would debate what really happened, would argue about the inconsistencies in the official account, would write competing theories about the nature of King Alpha's captivity and the identity of his captor. And Morgana would let them debate, would let them speculate, because some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud, too devastating to be common knowledge. The realm had been shattered not by the revelation of the secret, but by the secret itself. And now it was her responsibility, along with Alpha's, to hold the broken pieces together, to rebuild trust, to forge a new stability out of the chaos of discovered deception. In the years that followed, King Alfa ruled with a wisdom born of suffering and observation, implementing reforms that balanced the prosperity the Winter King had created with a mighty human approach to governance. Morgana stood at his side, not as a consort but as an advisor, as a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. They never spoke publicly about what had truly happened in the frozen tower, but between them, in private moments, they shared the burden of knowing, the weight of carrying a truth that could never be fully revealed. And sometimes, on clear winter nights when the stars shone with particular brightness, Morgana would stand at the window of her chamber and look toward the north, toward the place where the frozen tower once stood. She would remember the Winter King as if in our words, its claim that each had truly tried to be a good ruler, and she would wonder, not for the first time and not for the last, whether the line between saving a kingdom and enslaving it was as clear as she wanted to believe. The secret she had inherited, the forbidden truth she had uncovered, was not just about one entity and one stolen life. It was about the nature of power itself, the compromises each demanded, the lies each required, the terrible choices that rulers faced when confronted with impossible situations. Alfa had made his bargain in desperation, trading his freedom for his kingdom as his survival. The Winter King had fulfilled that bargain faithfully, if not honestly. And now Morgana stood as the guardian of that knowledge, the keeper of a secret that could never be fully told but would never be fully forgotten. The realm had been shattered by the truth of its own foundation, but from those shattered pieces, something new was being built. Something mighty honest, perhaps. Something mighty fragile, certainly. But also something mighty authentically human, shaped by hands that trembled with mortality rather than the cold perfection of an otherworldly entity. The first challenge came within weeks of Alfa's restoration. Lord Veric, the chief counselor who had served the Winter King with unwavering loyalty, stood before the assembled court and made an accusation that sent ripples of shock through the throne room. He claimed that the man sitting on the throne was not the true King Alfa, but an impostor, a pretender who had murdered the Real King and stolen his identity with the help of Morgana's dark magic. The irony was not lost on Morgana, who sat at Alfa's right hand, watching the counselor unknowingly describe exactly what had happened for the past 50 years, only with the victim and perpetrator reversed. Alfa did not rage or threaten. Instead, he did something the Winter King would never have done. He invited Veric to question him, publicly, about matters only the true King would know. Personal details, private conversations, secret decisions made decades ago when Veric himself was just beginning his service at court. And Alfa answered every question perfectly, not because he had been present for those conversations, but because he had witnessed them through stolen eyes, had observed every moment of his own life being lived by another. The court watched in silence as Veric's accusations crumbled under the weight of irrefutable knowledge. But Morgana saw something in the counselor's eyes that troubled her deeply. Not relief, not embarrassment, but calculation. Veric was not convinced. He was simply recognizing that his approach had failed, that direct confrontation would not work. He would need to be more subtle, more patient, more strategic. And Morgana knew that he would be watching, waiting for inconsistencies, for moments when Alfa's humanity showed through in ways that contradicted the cold efficiency the Winter King had displayed. The second challenge was more personal and infinitely more painful. 3 months after the tower's opening, a woman arrived at the castle gates claiming to be Alfa's daughter. Not Morgana, but another daughter, born during the early years of his reign to a woman he had loved before duty forced him to make a political marriage. She brought documentation, witnesses, and a striking physical resemblance that could not be denied. Her name was Serafini, and she had been raised in secret, protected from court intrigue, living a quiet life in a distant province. Alfa looked at the woman standing before his throne and felt his heart break for the second time in his long, tormented life. Because she was telling the truth. She was his daughter, but he had never known her, had never held her as an infant, had never watched her grow. De Winter Kingi had known, had kept the secret, had occasionally sent funds through anonymous channels to ensure she was cared for. But Ichi had never told Alfa, had never allowed him the joy of knowing he had another child. And now Serafini stood before him, a stranger wearing his features, asking for recognition, for legitimacy, for a place in the royal family. The court erupted in scandal. Questions of succession became suddenly complicated. If Serafini was legitimate, or even if she was acknowledged as a royal bastard, she would have certain rights, certain claims. And she was older than Morgana by several years, which meant that by traditional law, she should have been first in line for the throne. The nobility divided into factions almost immediately. Those who supported Morgana, who had freed the king and earned her place through sacrifice, and those who supported Serafini, who represented traditional bloodline succession regardless of the circumstances of her birth. Morgana watched the divisions forming and felt a fury building inside her that she barely knew how to contain. She had risked everything to free Alfa, had battled an entity that could have destroyed her mighty soul, had uncovered a truth that shook the very foundations of the realm, and now her own position was being questioned, her legitimacy challenged, by a woman who had lived in comfortable obscurity while Morgana had faced the horrors of the frozen tower alone. But Alfa surprised them both. In a private meeting with his two daughters, he revealed something that the Winter King had done, something that even Morgana had not discovered in her investigation of the tower's secrets. The entity had not simply stolen Alfa's body and ruled in his place. It had also systematically eliminated anyone who might pose a threat to its deception. Scholars who researched too deeply into the old magic. Nobles who questioned the king's changing personality. Most horrifically, several of Alfa's own children from various relationships, individuals who might have inherited enough of his essence to sense that something was wrong with their father. Serafini had survived only because her mother had hidden her so completely, had never revealed the child's true parentage even to the child herself until after her mother's death just months ago. The Winter King had known about her but had calculated that she was too far removed, too disconnected from court politics, to pose any real danger. And so it had allowed her to live, had even quietly ensured her well-being, out of some twisted sense of maintaining Alfa's bloodline while wearing his stolen face. The revelation devastated Serafini. She had grown up believing her father was a minor merchant who had died of a plague. Now she learned not only that her true father was the king, but that she had siblings who had been murdered by the very entity that had pretended to be her father for her entire life. The anger and grief and confusion that washed over her face was so raw that Morgana felt her own fury dissolve into something closer to compassion. Alfa made a decision that day that would define his restored reign. He acknowledged both daughters publicly, gave them equal status. He declared that the question of succession would not be determined by Azure traditional law, but by merit and the needs of the kingdom. Whoever demonstrated the wisdom, the strength, and the compassion necessary to rule would inherit the throne when his time came. It was a radical departure from tradition, a statement that the old ways had failed, that new approaches were necessary for a kingdom that had been fundamentally changed by the revelation of its own false history. The announcement caused upheaval, but it also accomplished something unexpected. It forced Morgana and Serafini to see each other not as rivals but as allies, both victims of the Winter King's machinations, both daughters trying to find their place in a world that had been built on lies. They did not become friends immediately. The wounds were too fresh, the jealousies too raw, but they began to work together, cautiously at first, then with growing respect, until they formed a partnership that became one of the pillars of Alfa's restored government. But the greatest challenge came not from political intrigue or family drama, but from the realm beyond the veil itself. 6 months after the Winter King's expulsion, strange phenomena began occurring throughout the kingdom. Ice forming on windows in the middle of summer, whispers in dead languages echoing through empty corridors, dreams that felt too vivid, too real, dreams of frozen wastelands in entities mad of starlight and hunger. Morgana recognized the signs immediately. The Winter King was not gone, not completely. Its physical connection to the mortal world had been severed, but each had left behind echoes, fragments of itself embedded in the places where each had exerted the most power. The throne room, the royal chambers, the council hall where each had made its most significant decisions. These fragments were not conscious, not capable of independent action. But they were influencing things, subtly altering reality in ways that grew more pronounced as time passed. She convened a secret gathering of those who had been freed from the tower, individuals who had spent years or decades in close proximity to the Winter King's magic and had developed a sensitivity to its presence. Together, they formed a kind of task force, identifying locations where the echoes were strongest, developing rituals to cleanse those spaces, to scrub away the last vestiges of the entity's influence. Each was during one of these cleansing rituals, in the throne room itself, that they made a discovery that changed everything they thought they understood about the Winter King's true nature. Beneath the throne, hidden by layers of glamoury misdirection, they found a chamber that even the entity itself had not created. Each was older, dating back to the First Kingdom, each contained records that had survived the purification wars through sheer luck and powerful preservation spells. The records told a story that recontextualized everything. The Winter King was not simply a malevolent entity that had tricked Alpha into a terrible bargain. It was a refugee. One of the last survivors of the First Kingdom, which had not fallen due to a hubris or magical catastrophe as the official histories claimed, but due to a genocide. The new kingdoms that rose in its place had systematically hunted and destroyed the beings of pure magic that had ruled the old realm, viewing them as abominations, as threats to the natural order. The Winter King had fled beyond the veil not out of choice, but out of desperate necessity, had spent centuries in exile, watching the mortal world from afar, until each sensed an opportunity in Alpha's desperation. And while each had certainly stolen Alpha's life, while each had committed unforgivable violations, each had also genuinely tried to create a good kingdom, to prove that beings like itself could coexist with humanity, could even improve human society. The discovery split the cleansing timidão demorou. Some argued that understanding the Winter King's motivations changed nothing, that the violation of Alpha's autonomy remained inexcusable regardless of the entity's tragic history. Others insisted that context mattered, that the situation was more morally complex than they had initially believed, that perhaps some kind of reconciliation or at least acknowledgement was necessary. Morgana found herself in the middle, pulled in both directions by competing convictions. She thought about the Winter King's final words, its insistence that each had tried to be a good ruler. She thought about the prosperity each had created, the lives each had saved, the policies each had implemented that genuinely improved the kingdom. And she thought about Alpha, frozen and screaming silently for 50 years, robbed of half a century of life, forced to watch his existence being lived by another. She brought the records to Alpha and asked him what he wanted to do with this information. His response surprised her. He asked her to read him every detail, every record, every piece of context about the Winter King's past. And when she finished, he sat in silence for a long time, his face unreadable, his hands folded in his lap. Finally, he spoke. He said that he hated the Winter King for what each had done to him, that the raging grief and sense of violation would never fully heal. But he also acknowledged that the entity had kept his kingdom alive when he could not, had protected his people when he was powerless to do so. The Winter King had been both his tormentor and his replacement, both the thief who stole his life and the guardian who preserved what he valued most. Each was a contradiction he would have to live with, an ambiguity that could not be resolved through simple narratives of good and evil. He ordered that the records be preserved but not made public. The kingdom needed stability, needed clear narratives, needed their believing the righteousness of his restoration, but he also ordered that the cleansing rituals be modified to include acknowledgement, to recognize the Winter King's existence and its complex legacy before erasing its echoes. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but that seemed to be the only honest response to an impossible situation. The cleansing took months. As each location was purified, the strange phenomena decreased. The ice melted, the whispers faded, the dreams became normal again. And slowly, gradually, the kingdom began to stabilize, began to feel like it was truly ruled by a human king again rather than the ghost of an otherworldly entity. But there was one location that resisted all attempts at cleansing, the site where the frozen tower had stood, now just an empty patch of ground surrounded by scattered fragments of stony ice. No matter what rituals they performed, no matter how much power they channeled, the echoes there remained strong, pulsing with a presence that felt almost alive. Morgana spent weeks studying the site, trying to understand why it was different. Eventually, she realized the truth. The tower had not just been a prison for Alfa and the others. It had been an anchor point, a place where the barrier between the mortal world and the realm beyond the veil was naturally thin. The Winter King had chosen it specifically for that reason, had used its unique properties to facilitate its crossing. And now, with the entity gone, that thinness remained, creating a permanent weak point in reality. The implications were staggering. If the barrier was weak at the tower's site, then other entities could potentially cross through, could enter the mortal world, just as the Winter King had. The kingdom's secret was not just about past deception, but about ongoing vulnerability, about a threat that would persist for as long as that weak point existed. Alfa made a decision that would define the remainder of his reign. He ordered the construction of a new tower on that site, but this time, it would not be a prison. It would be a watchtower, a guard post, a monitoring station staffed by individuals trained in the old magic, people who could detect attempts to breach the barrier and respond before any entity could fully cross over. Morgana would lead this new order, would train the next generation of guardians, would ensure that what happened with the Winter King could never happen again. The irony was not lost on her. She had destroyed the frozen tower to free Alfa from his prison, and now she was building a new tower to imprison herself in a different kind of duty. But she accepted the responsibility without hesitation, understanding that some burdens could not be shared, some prices had to be paid. So Afini, for her part, chose a different path. She became Alfa's representative to the outer provinces, traveling the kingdom, listening to people's concerns, addressing problems that the capital had ignored for too long. She and Morgana maintained their careful alliance, recognizing that they were stronger together than apart, that the kingdom needed both of them to fulfill different but equally vital roles. Years passed. Alfa aged, his body finally catching up to the 5 decades each had been preserved in ice. His hair turned white. Lines appeared on his face. His hands began to shake with the tremor of advanced years, but his mind remained sharp, honed by the unique perspective of someone who had watched his own life from the outside for half a century. He implemented reforms that baffled traditional nobles but improved countless lives. He opened the royal archives to scholars, allowing research into the old magic that had been suppressed for generations. He established councils that gave voice to common people, not just nobility. He created laws protecting those who had been marginalized or forgotten. Through each all, he carried the weight of knowing that much of what he was doing had been started by the Winter King, that he was building on foundations laid by his tormentor. Morgana visited him often in his final years, sitting with him in the royal chambers, discussing matters of state in philosophy in the nature of identity. He told her once that he no longer knew where he ended and the Winter King began, that watching himself live for 50 years had created a strange kind of dual consciousness. He had all his original memories, yes, but he also had the memories of observing the Winter King's rule, and sometimes he caught himself thinking in ways that felt more like the entity than himself. She asked him if he regretted anything, if given the chance to go back and refuse the original bargain, he would make a different choice. He was silent for a long time before answering. Finally, he said that he regretted the cost, the pain, the violation of his autonomy, but he could not honestly say he regretted the outcome. The Winter King had saved the kingdom when he could not. And now he was building on that foundation, creating something that synthesized the best of both approaches, human compassion combined with the long-term perspective of an entity that had lived for centuries. It was not the answer Morgana wanted, but it was the honest one, and she respected him for that honesty, even as it complicated her own feelings about everything that had happened. Alfa died on a winter morning, peacefully in his sleep, with both his daughters at his bedside. The kingdom mourned, genuinely and deeply, for a king who had suffered unimaginably yet ruled with wisdom and compassion. The official history recorded his reign as one of the greatest in the kingdom's existence, noting his mysterious captivity, a miraculous restoration but carefully omitting the details that would have raised torment questions. The truth, the full truth, remained locked in Morgana's grandmother's journal, preserved in the archives under layers of protection and secrecy. Morgana added her own final entry to the journal, documenting Alfa's death and the legacy he left behind. She wrote about the moral complexity of the situation, about the impossibility of simple judgments, about the way that good and evil could become inextricably tangled when viewed from a sufficient distance. She wrote that she had inherited the frozen tower expecting to find evidence of villainy, of pure malevolence that could be defeated and banished. Instead, she had found a tragedy with nuclear heroes or villains, only beings making impossible choices in desperate circumstances. The Winter King had been both monster and savior. Alfa had been both victim and beneficiary, and she herself had been both liberator and, in some ways, destroyer of a stability that had brought genuine prosperity. The forbidden secret she had uncovered was not just about one stolen life or one deceptive entity. It was about the fundamental ambiguity of power and justice, the way that truth could be simultaneously liberating and destructive, the impossibility of pure righteousness in a world where every choice carried unforeseen consequences. Serafini inherited the throne, as had been obvious to everyone except the most traditional nobles for years. She ruled with a pragmatism that would have made both Alfa and the Winter King proud, implementing policies that balanced tradition with innovation, stability with progress. And Morgana remained at her post in the new tower, watching the barrier between worlds, training new generations of guardians, ensuring that the kingdom's vulnerability never became a catastrophe. But sometimes, on the clearest winter nights, when the stars shone with unusual brightness and the air carried a particular kind of cold, Morgana would feel something. Not Kitcha presence, not Kitcha consciousness, but an echo of an echo, a residual impression left behind by an entity that had ruled the kingdom for 50 years and then been cast back into exile. She never told anyone about these moments, never documented them in any official record. But she would stand at the window of her chamber in the new tower, looking out at the kingdom spread below her, and she would think about the Winter King, about its loneliness, about its desperate attempt to belong to a world that had hunted its kind to near extinction, about its genuine efforts to be a good ruler, even as it committed the unforgivable act of stealing another's life. In those quiet moments, when no one else could hear, she would sometimes whisper a few words into the winter air. Not key to forgiveness, not key to condemnation, but acknowledgement, recognition that the entity had existed, had mattered, had changed the world in ways both terrible and transformative. The kingdom had been shattered by the revelation of its stolen foundation, but Ichi had also been saved by that very theft, preserved by the same deception that had violated Ichi. The forbidden secret of King Alfa was not just about what happened in the past, but about what the past meant for the future. Every king who sat on the throne after Alpha would rule knowing that sovereignty could be stolen, that identity could be usurped, that the line between self and other was more fragile than anyone wanted to believe. Every ruler would have to grapple with the knowledge that sometimes salvation came from unexpected sources, that sometimes the greatest crimes produced the greatest goods, that the universe was vastly more complex and morally ambiguous than any simple story could capture. Morgana lived for many more years, longer than anyone expected, as if the exposure to the Winter King's magic had changed her in subtle ways, extending her life, sharpening her perceptions. She trained dozens of guardians, prevented 3 attempted breaches of the barrier, and wrote extensively about the nature of magic and the relationship between the mortal world and the realms beyond. And when she finally died, in her sleep like her father, surrounded by students and colleagues who had become her family, her last thought was not of regret or triumph, but of curiosity. She wondered what the Winter King had found when Ichi returned to its frozen realm, whether Ichi was welcomed or condemned, whether its chimi in the mortal world had changed Ichi as fundamentally as Ichi had changed the kingdom. She wondered if somewhere beyond the veil, in a realm of eternal ice, in starlight, the entity remembered its chimi wearing Alpha S face, remembered the kingdom Ichi had ruled, remembered the daughter who had cast Ichi out. The journal, now containing entries from 3 generations, was sealed and placed in the deepest vault of the royal archives, with instructions that each should only be opened if the kingdom ever faced a similar crisis. The official histories mentioned the frozen tower passing, noted that King Alpha had been imprisoned by dark magic and freed by his brave daughter, but provided no details that would raise uncomfortable questions. And so the secret that had shattered the realm was carefully reburied, not forgotten but contained, preserved for those who might need to understand that truth is never simple, that justice is never pure, and that sometimes the greatest heroes and the greatest villains are the same being wearing different faces. The kingdom moved forward, stronger in some ways, more fragile others, forever changed by the revelation that its golden age had been ruled by a stolen soul, forever grappling with the implications of that impossible history. The frozen tower was gone, but its legacy remained, woven into every policy, every law, every decision made by every ruler who came after. In the new tower, the watchtower, guardian stood eternal vigil, protecting a barrier that would always be weak, always be vulnerable, always be a reminder that the world contained mysteries and dangers which could never be fully conquered, only watched, only guarded, only acknowledged with the humility of those who understood that they knew far less than they wanted to believe.